Hi, it's Bruno at the Green Boater TV, and today I am so happy to have Priya Shukla join us for this episode of the Green Boater TV. Welcome, Priya.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I understand you're currently pursuing a Ph.D. in ecology at the University of California, Davis, and you're studying the effects of climate change on seafood, which is grown in the oceans, which is fantastic. I understand that you received your undergraduate degree in environmental science and management at UC Davis and earned your master's in ecology from the San Diego State University. Priya is an avid science communicator and Forbes contributor with a digital column focused on ocean science and climate change. In addition to being a publicly active graduate education fellow with Imagining America, Priya is also a graduate fellow with the Sacramento Area Scholars Strategy Network and a National Science Foundation research trainee in the Sustainable Ocean Programs at UC Davis. Priya, we are so happy to have you here, and we're going to be talking about, I call it deep water and mussels.
So, sounds lovely.
Yeah, well, that's a topic. But before we get there, I just would like to know, how did someone like you go from where you were a little girl into where you are today, passionate about marine biology and particularly mussel study?
Yeah, so this story starts before I was born. So my parents are from India, and they immigrated here to California in the 1980s. And so my father grew up in this village in India that grew a lot of vegetables that I grew up eating. So I come from farmer roots. And my dad was this incredible environmentalist and naturalist. And so I grew up in the tide pools of Half Moon Bay, which is just south of San Francisco. And so I grew up splashing around in puddles and getting excited by all of the pretty sea stars and octopi and seashells. But I had no idea that I would end up doing marine biology. That was a complete happenstance where basically while I was in college at UC Davis, I thought I was going to grow up to clone the next big animal. And instead I found myself in an undergraduate class called The Oceans, and it blew my mind. And I learned for the first time there how much the oceans were doing to mitigate the effects of climate change by absorbing heat and CO2 out of the atmosphere, but also what damage that was then doing to the coral reefs. And so I knew that I wanted to go on to study how climate change was affecting our oceans. So I got my degree at UC Davis, and then I went to San Diego State and I got my master's studying how climate change affects the kelp forests there. And that was incredible because I realized that the kelp forests, while beautiful in and of themselves, also supported an enormous lobster fishery, which I had no sense of when I first moved to San Diego. And I realized that the people that I cared about were the lobster fishermen, and I began to care more about them and less about the kelp. And so I knew that I wanted to sort of come back to my farming roots and think about the people who are impacted by climate change in the oceans as well as the oceans themselves, which is why I now study how climate change is affecting the seafood that we grow along the coast.
Well, that's quite a story, and I hope that you still take time to go in those tidal pools and splash around.
Oh, yes, they're actually right behind me right now.
I still do that as often as I can. It just inspires me to see all this microclimate living in these little pools, and how sensitive it is really to, when those things disappear, it's actually an indicator other things are going wrong.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
What does the day in the life of Priya look like today? What are you currently working on?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm really interested in the mussels that we grow here in California. And that's because mussels are really good at taking in what is happening in the ambient environment. So if there are pollutants, for example, mussels can be used as biological indicators of heavy metal pollution. And recently, I've been looking at mussels as an indicator of climate change in the ocean. So we can see how they respond to temperature, but also changes in ocean chemistry, because it affects the size of their shells. And California is really unique because it's on the front lines of oceanic climate change. And that's because all of the ocean's waters move along our coasts, and they start in the North Atlantic Ocean, and it takes them about 1,000 years to travel all the way around the world to California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. And so that water, when it gets here, is almost 1,000 years old. And it sits at the very bottom. And occasionally when the wind is blowing offshore from California, it actually causes these surface waters to move offshore in this deep, 1,000-year-old water, which is rich in carbon dioxide from things breathing and things decomposing, and low in oxygen, again, from things breathing and things decomposing. It all comes up on shore, and it actually mimics and is actually affected a little bit by some of the climate change that we're experiencing, but really mimics those ocean conditions. That will
So are you saying, are you saying, Priya, that if I was a boater in the North Atlantic and I poured some pollution, some toxic elements in the ocean, 1,000 years later, a mussel in California on the shore is going to be eating it?
Yeah, that is absolutely a possibility. Yes.
That's
Um,
incredible.
yeah, it is incredible. And things that even before that 1,000-year life cycle went up there. So we're already seeing things like plastic in the deep ocean. You can even find old washing machines in the deep sea. That even if we were to stop burning fossil fuels today, it would still take hundreds to thousands of years for us to stop seeing those impacts in the ocean. And something really dramatic about the ocean is that it, in fact, helps regulate our climate. Again, because it absorbs all of that heat and those greenhouse gases. And so that means that you could be in Kansas in the middle of the United States, but the climate that you are experiencing is a direct product of what the ocean is doing and in its interactions with the atmosphere.
You know, one of the articles that you wrote for Forbes magazine, that's how we got in touch, talked really about what are some of the things that we can look forward to. And I get a sense from you that you're not a negative person, that, you know, you're studying these things. And it's amazing to me that you're studying the effects of pollution that could be, you know, sourced 1,000 years ago. But you know, what is it that brings your enthusiasm about the future? Because so much today is negative.
So I didn't get into this before, but I am really driven by solutions. And I like to consider that the doctoral research that I'm doing right now is really solutions oriented. So I talked about using mussels here in California as an indicator of climate change. And the mussels I used to work with are actually just the sort of mussels that you find along the coast. But now for my doctoral research, I'm actually working on mussels that farmers grow in the coastal waters. And I'm really interested in doing this in California because it's on the front lines of climate change. But California is a Mediterranean climate. And so it's really oceanographically and climatically similar to places like Chile and South Africa and Spain and Portugal, where there's also a lot of mussels grown for seafood. And so those places don't always have the same resources financially, intellectually, that Californians do. And so I'm really interested in learning what the impacts of climate change look like here in California, and then going to places in Chile, in South Africa, in Portugal and Spain, where they're also doing mussel farming, but some of it's subsistence farming, some of it is a cultural legacy, and some of it is an effort towards some kind of social and environmental justice.
But it sounds to me that you're actually an ally for the farmer as well as for the ocean, and that the two could work hand in hand.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this. So part of the reason that I'm a huge advocate for mussel aquaculture is because our population is rapidly growing. So by 2050, there are expected to be 9 billion people on this planet. That's nearly 2 billion more people than there are right now in the next 30 years. And so what that means is that we'll have to find a way to feed these people nutritiously and sustainably. And that's a word that's thrown around a lot, but what I mean by that is that we should be able to make sure that everybody has access to high quality nutritious food on a regular basis. And in order to feed people, let's say with just beef, you would need an area the size of South America. To actually feed all these people. And there's nowhere on Earth that we actually have that sort of land accessible. But we could get that same kind of protein just from feeding people mussel tissue and mussel meat. And that's because you would only need maybe an area the size of the continental shelf of New Zealand to do that. And that's because you can grow mussels three-dimensionally. So that means that you can stack those mussels on top of one another in the water column, and you can grow just as much protein. You can't quite stack cows the same way, which is why you are able to grow so much more protein in such a smaller area.
Is there anything that's surprised you? Has there been anything that's sort of going, wow, like I did not know that, and this is an area that is of real keen interest to me?
Yeah, and so I'm going to put on my naive scientist hat now. I thought scientists were the absolute end-all be-all experts on issues. And in working with farmers and people who have spent their life on the water. And that means people who boat frequently for work. I have learned that scientists oftentimes actually know the least out of the people who spend their time on the water. And I want to share one really specific experience. And that was, I was in North Carolina in September, and I was on a cruise that was going through the Outer Banks. And I met somebody who shrimped just recreationally, just for fun. And he was answering questions that a scientist was asking him as if he had lived in the water his entire life. And he understood where the shrimp were, why they behaved the way they did, why red drum, which are kind of fish, were in a certain place, why you fish a certain way because the fish behaved a certain way. And scientists spend their time reading literature. And certainly there are scientists who know just as much because they had very similar experiences. But coming from a family that really prioritized education as a way to go above and beyond in society, I actually lost some of the appreciation that comes for being with the environment. And so I think there is so much knowledge and expertise that boaters and farmers can provide that is a resource as a scientist I am so excited to tap into. And that's also what drives the research that I do, because I think I will learn so much more and my research will be so much more relevant by integrating the people who know the environment much better than I ever could.
I'm going to ask you a loaded question. So why are you doing this? You could be off like making your millions inventing something.
I get asked that a lot, and I don't have a good enough answer other than the fact that I am extremely happy in doing what I do. And so somebody recently asked me how I measure my own success. And the best way for me to answer that is that I'm making sure that every single day I am taking another step towards this broader goal of making sure that people around the world have access to all the resources they need to live and thrive. And we're really far away from that. And so trying to make sure that the work that I do every single day brings us one step closer is what brings me happiness. I don't know that going off and making my millions would bring me the same kind of happiness.
If there was a message that you could give voters to further the cause of a healthy ocean, particularly for food,
Mm-hmm.
what would you have to say to a voter? I'm a voter. What would you say to me, Bruno? This is what you need to. This is the one thing you need to do, or the two things.
Yeah. So my first time on a boat, I was 19 years old. No, not even 19. I think I was 21. And I was on a boat to do research. And it was my first time, and I was really terrified because before then I think all I done was like whale watching boats, which are much bigger and sturdier, and I had to be told to make sure I didn't lock my knees, all this stuff that other people knew really intrinsically who had been on boats. And it was so eye-opening to have the wind in my hair, to smell the sea in that way. It smells so differently when you're moving through it than when you're just sitting on the coast reading a book on the beach. And now when I go to these mussel farms and oyster farms, some of them are along the coast for sure, but others are actually further off water. And I think those who have boats and who are willing to share that with other people, especially people who don't have access to seeing these farms, or maybe don't have access to the food that they want themselves. If you can offer your boat up to these people and giving them access to seeing these sites that are pretty remote and hard to get to, I think that would be an amazing service. And then in recognizing that this might be their first time on a boat, sharing with them some of what you know about the ocean environment, because that is knowledge that I think is really beneficial, and an expertise that every boater has that a lot of people who don't know how boats work, who have never been on a boat, just don't have the experience with and don't have access to that information. And so showing people where the food is, maybe even partnering with a farm to allow them to taste some of it, and then sharing some of your own knowledge about the ocean and why you care about your own green boating activities would be excellent.
That's so insightful, because we as boaters, I've boated my whole life. You take some of these things for granted. It still blows me away, but I'm surprised often when I take somebody out on my boat for the first time. They've done like you. They've been on a ferry. Maybe they've been on a kayak or at the beach. But once they are out and they're able to see just the splendor of nature and the beauty and the magnificence of the creatures that are there, what happens is there's almost a transformation, isn't there? There's a,
Absolutely, yes.
yeah.
It's that I think about it when I see a new creature for the first time. It's like that spark of wonder, that childhood like wonder. It's incredible.
Yeah, and from that, people are inspired to do their part. We have no idea, what we can offer to people once we inspire them, because then, especially for young people, it gives them a whole new perspective, and it could inspire them, much like you were inspired as a young girl with the ocean pools, and look where you are today. Priya, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it. I wish you all the best. We will stay in touch. For the Green Boater community that would like to find out more about your work and how to contact you and how to interact with you, where can they go?
As Bruno mentioned, I have a digital column on Forbes' website. So you can go to blogs.forbes.com/Priya Shukla, which is my full name. You can also go to my website, which is priyashukla.com. And I'm very active on Twitter. So you can follow me at Priology, PRIYOLOGY.
Priya, thank you very much. We
Great.
really look forward to hearing more about your work and your journey as well. And hopefully one day we'll get a chance to get on a boat together, inspire some people together, and just see what that brings for our community.
I would love that. Thanks so much, Bruno.
You're very, very welcome. So this has been Bruno at the Green Boater TV, and we've been talking with Priya. Bruno from the Green Boater TV. Thank you.